Cognitive dissonance is strong, baby. Oh, Nikki. Now, I want to talk about this viral clip that is blowing up the internet, not because of the obvious lies that she's saying in this clip, but because it points to two key myths that Nikki is using to appeal to a specific audience. So I teach on a topic called narrative intelligence, which is understanding how cultural, personal, and historical stories influence and drive our current beliefs and behaviors and lead to the outcomes that we're seeing in the present. And Nikki Haley is operating from the belief that specific cultural myths are going to appeal to the people that she wants to vote for her. Now, these two key myths are the idea that all discrimination is removed and no longer exists once the explicit laws that practice discrimination are removed from the books. The second idea is that any inequality that you see out here, baby, it is because of individual character flaw, lack of hard work, and lack of talent. Now, these two key myths have been built off of a concept called the social order worldview. So it emphasizes equality of opportunity with any variation of outcomes that we see is a difference in talent, effort, or preferences, or capability. Now, the little problem with this belief and the stories that are attached to it is it denies and gaslights how environment actually determines our equality of opportunity, and that even if we remove explicit discriminatory laws, there is implicit bias that leads to inequality of opportunity and ultimately inequality of outcomes. Let me give you a little analogy that summarizes this up. Imagine that there is a relay race being run and you have runner A and runner B. Runner A comes from a long line of runners that essentially had preferential treatment based on discriminatory practices and laws. They got to hoard the best sneakers from other groups around them. They essentially got the best protein shakes, and they had special coaches that helped them to improve their running skills. And they were also placed 50 yards ahead of the starting line based on these false ideas and beliefs of being a superior group that should be treated differently than other groups. Now, maybe those laws are no longer in effect in the race today, but because of that discriminatory practice being passed from generation to generation, they got to hoard resources, which makes them have immense amounts of opportunities that they didn't earn and aren't necessarily based on meritocracy. Then you have runner B that essentially comes from a really long line of runners who are exceptionally talented and essentially had their resources stolen from them based on discriminatory practices and laws. They had their sneakers stolen, so they're expected to run barefoot in the race. They try to create protein shakes and pass them on in their communities from ancient recipes with incredible insights, and those were poisoned by other groups who didn't want them to have those protein shakes. And then they weren't given any trainers and were expected to do their own training to improve their skills. And they were placed 50 yards behind the starting line in the race based on discriminatory practice and law. And even if those discriminatory practices are no longer explicit, the generational issues and trauma that comes from that discriminatory practice means that runner B has to start with extremely limited resources and still rise above average and be exceptional to beat the obstacles that have been placed in front of them. Now, what's interesting with people who have a social order worldview is they will excuse away these differences in opportunity by merit. And I think why they do this is because it really affects the ego. If you have to realize that maybe some of the things that have occurred in your life, the unearned advantages, the preferential treatment, is not because you are the best, that you're superior, that you're the hardest working, and that it was based on merit, that could be a huge blow to the ego. And maybe those individuals have been rewarded for mediocrity and see mediocrity as the gold standard. And individuals with the social order worldview also believe that runner B is in that position because they're inferior and haven't worked hard enough. And if runner B beats runner A in the race, they're just seeing that as, hey, look, there's equality of opportunity. They were still able to do it, not realizing how unfair it is to expect an exceptionally talented runner B to overcome all of the obstacles. Beating runner A means that they have to have immense amounts of talent that is the exception and over the average to be seen as average. Now, the reason why all this matters is because we do not have equality of opportunity, even though Nikki Haley is trying to appeal to a voter base who believes that we do. And that is because not only of this discriminatory practice of passing on hoarded resources generationally, which affects the present, but because of implicit biases. Because if you were raised around this culture and belief that you are superior, or that the people who look like you or think like you are superior, you're going to bring those beliefs and those stories into your day-to-day experiences and choices. And if you're an individual in a position of power, you're going to then enact those myths and those biases in the things that you do and the things that you choose. So now we're grappling with the fact that we do not have equality of opportunity, and we have tons of implicit bias with people in positions of power, politically, educationally, medically, and economically. People are constantly grappling with other people's implicit biases and not being given opportunities or chances because of discrimination that people have internalized in how they think, how they view others that are different from them, and how they make choices when they're in a position of power. So here's one example of many on how equality of opportunity doesn't really exist, but people can still have exceptional talent and have personal skill to be able to overcome certain obstacles. This is an article that highlighted a study that showcased people who are trying to escape poverty need to have about 20 years of nearly nothing going wrong. And that means no unexpected things that they couldn't control. That could be an accident, a health scare, some kind of unexpected massive financial bill. They have to have none of that happen in addition to their own capabilities and talents for 20 straight years. So that showcases that yes, people can overcome obstacles. That does not mean that they have equality of opportunity. And people who are not able to overcome those obstacles are also not talentless or lacking character capabilities. So why all of this is so important is because we all need to become more narratively intelligent. When a Nikki Haley gets on stage and opens up her mouth and says these myths, we need to be able to recognize them and critique them and counter them with truthful, factual, full picture stories. Right now, there are lots of myths being pushed around about why the world looks like it does, with lots of pieces of the story missing. And we can't have a functional society that thrives and is healthy if we're not telling the full story, if we're not building relationships based on truth and trust. And we all get to participate in that based on how narratively intelligent we are in these conversations and discussions and the ways that we're building, believing, and sharing stories. So I hope that you can continue to be a little bit more critical of the news and the media that you see, because we all need to challenge these myths so all of us can thrive, because this BS ain't gonna cut it. Okay? Okay.